I don't know if many of you are familiar with feminism, or familiar with Judith Butler. I was working on the assumption that most people aren't, which is often a dangerous assumption. At least in my experience, most philosophers aren't. And this being the Philosophy Society, I thought, right, there'll be a load of people that don't know about feminism. So the first part of the talk is basically an overview of feminism, on the basis that I think there's a lot of misconceptions about feminism in the general public, or sort of standard understandings of what feminism is, tend to be pretty off the mark, and I wanted to try and correct that. However, if you're all sitting here with a good knowledge of feminism, this first part may be a bit dull, or I see one face already there. Okay, good. I was not expecting that. That's fine. Right. In fact, the talk was inspired by a student who's not here that I taught this term. And in the first 2 minutes of our first tutorial together, he'd said he came out with, the only thing I hate more than creationists are feminists. And I thought, well, there's something fundamentally problematic if you're equating feminists in any way with creationists, or if you somehow think they're worse, which made me think, well, what do you think a feminist is? So I thought I'd set the record straight and show, A, what I take to be a plausible form of feminism, which I think Judith Butler basically gives us. There's not too much that's particularly critical in the talk, so perhaps afterwards for questions I thought we'd delve more into the nitty-gritty of what people think of her. I thought for the actual talk itself it would be better just to give a general overview, again for those of you who aren't familiar with Butler, just as a way in, and then, yeah, so for those of you with a good knowledge of feminism and Butler, then maybe for the questions we can delve into that. But hopefully it'll be of interest for those of you who haven't delved into the fantastic world of Butler and feminism. Good, that's the overly long introduction out of the way. So, overview of what I want to do. Basically, I'm going to cash out the history of feminism, introduction to Butler's work, and then just sort of reflect on some of the implications for politics and philosophy, particularly as I use Butler in my work. If I have time, we'll see how I get on. The overriding concern being to demonstrate the continuing relevance of value of feminism, philosophy, politics, social theory, etc. Good, yes. I think feminism is really interesting and really useful, and hopefully this will give you some idea why. There you go. I'm going to, perhaps controversially, divide feminism into 3 waves, which is kind of, I guess, standard practice in a lot of literary books on feminism. It's obviously controversial. It's not meant to say, look, there are 3 schools of thought and we can neatly divide them in feminists into these 3 groups, but they represent 3 sort of historical stages or phases that feminism has gone, and I think there are a sort of set of particular arguments or assumptions that we can associate with each wave that mark them out, particularly perhaps for the first 2. Again, it's not meant to be an exhaustive account, and it's not meant to sort of say this is exactly how it is, but hopefully it'll give you a grasp on how feminism has shifted over time, and also give you a grasp on where Butler's coming from. Because I think to make sense of Butler, you need to understand the historical context that she's coming out of. So what is it that she's challenging? What is it that she's rejecting? What are the problems she's trying to solve? So this sort of brief history is going to give you an idea of what those issues are. And again, this isn't meant to be a linear trajectory that, look, feminism was sort of a bit right back then, and we got more right, and then, you know, we pretty much solved it now, or we'll solve it, you know, 10 years down the line. It's not a progressive or teleological account. I think that's important to stress that, you know, the work of early feminists is just as sort of useful and can be in certain contexts now as it was then, and vice versa. So I'm not sort of suggesting that there's this nice, smooth improvement within feminist theory. There is, of course, significant disagreement between feminists. I think the unifying concept of any is probably patriarchy, but how that's understood and how we should respond to that is that's where the sort of the issues are, the interesting debates. And it's by far no means settled, and it probably can't be settled, but that's interesting, exciting, so I think that's a problem. Patriarchy being, what is patriarchy? Well, I don't know, I guess we'll find out. Dominance of men, rule of the father, something like that. Good. So, first wave feminism, briefly. I guess one of the main figures is Mary Wollstonecraft. She wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women. She was also the mother of Mary Shelley, yes, married Shelley, and wrote Frankenstein. So there we go. What's interesting about her? Well, I guess it seems to me the first wave feminism, there's a focus on the education of women. This is a big thing. Things that what we need to analyse and what we need to focus on is educating women and improving women, these sorts of things. So she claimed improvement in society is dependent upon improving women's mind and status within society. The problems women have faced is that they haven't had sufficient intellectual stimulation, they haven't been able to develop or realise their full rational minds. She thinks before become more fully human, become more rational, independent, self-commanding. She thinks this is what women need to become, and they do that through education. So I guess in a very broad brushstroke, what the idea is that women become more like men, or more like the normative ideal of man, the rational, self-commanding, independent individual. Traditionally, women haven't been allowed to do that. They're rendered dependent through social practices, lack of education, lack of rights. They're not full citizens. They want to become full citizens. How you do that? Well, you give them the same opportunities as men, and they're capable of being just as rational as men, just as self-commanding. So that's what she's sort of focusing on, I think, it seems to me. So there's sort of the early feminism generally seen as seeking some kind of equality. The idea being that women are the equals of men. Whereas previously men said, you're this inferior species. Said, no, we're not. We're just as good as you. But the idea is becoming human. And I think traditionally they would sort of deemed less than human. So that's sort of what the first wave is aiming at. Another important bunch of feminists now is the suffragettes, as you probably all know about, campaign for women to have the vote. So again, it's looking at legal equality, the extension of legal rights to women that have previously been denied to women. That was their agenda. Focus on equality and full citizenship. Famously, Emily Davison, if you know her, jumped in front of the King's Horse in the Epsom Derby in 1913 and died. And this was one of the big moments in suffragette. Useful in terms of attention, bad in terms of someone dying. It's no good. Yeah, I think, not being flippant about it, it was a tragedy. I think what's interesting as well with the suffragettes is if you look at the various strategies they employed, they were fairly militant. The image of the sort of passive female was totally challenged by the suffragettes. I mean, many of them were in jail, they went on hunger strikes, they blew things up, they made bombs and exploded them, they smashed windows, they attacked the police. I think that's interesting. Why do I think that's interesting? I don't know. It strikes me as interesting. Challenging the normative image of women. I guess that's interesting. Yes. And sort of success, 1980, women over 30 meeting certain conditions were granted the vote. That's a good achievement. 1928, all women over 21 granted the vote. That's an even better achievement. So sort of again, the emphasis on legal and social equality, the focus on rights. Amazing thing that looked less than 100 years ago, women didn't have the vote. I think that's crazy. 100 years, it's not a lot. Good thing now. Okay, so that's sort of broad brushstroke, first wave feminism, moving to second wave feminism. I guess it's really sort of flourished or was sort of pigeonholed as a sort of 60s and 70s feminism. But the origins lie, as lots of feminism does, in Simone de Beauvoir, the mother of feminism, modern feminism. And a famous declaration that one is not born a woman, rather one becomes one. Or rather one becomes a woman. Probably haven't written that quote right. The issue being that she turns attention onto the way that a woman is constructed or defined. Rather than saying, this is woman, we need to attach more rights to her, said, no, what does the term woman mean? How is it functioning? What are the effects of being called a woman? What is the value of woman as a concept? And as a contestable concept, a concept that can be rewritten. I think it's really interesting, the idea that values attach to concepts. We can challenge those concepts, we can challenge those values. That's not just about extending rights, but it's about changing the definition of the term. So how is women defined? What are the effects of this definition, and how much should be defined differently? And this is the key here. How can we redefine women differently? In more positive ways, in less exclusionary ways, in less oppressive ways, something like that. Yeah. So for de Beauvoir, women then is cast as man's other, or shadow. So she's defined as purely negative. She's always a lack. She's always what man doesn't have. So man has reason, woman doesn't. Man has strength, woman doesn't. Man has self-command, woman doesn't. She is always not what man is, and then hence inherently negative because man being positive. So she always she can't win, she just is the other of man. She's that which can't be sort of expressed because man is that which is expressed, she is this lack anti-essence, something like that. And so I think you find generally in the 15th and 16th and 17th that feminist politics comes about rewriting women in history and literature and philosophy and science. So looking at the representations of women and trying to redefine them, re-represent them in alternative, empowering ways. For instance, in history, well, obviously history classically is a story of men, so let's have a different account of history which pays attention to women. Or let's look at how women were portrayed in literature. Let's have feminist writings that think through what it is to be a woman, to experience life as a woman, rather than men writing about women, because that's what it's been up till now. So wrestling control of these sorts of things, which is sort of present, I guess, in the first wave, but less, it wasn't sort of the central concern of first wave feminism. And part of the notion of this, and this I think where it gets really interesting, is challenging the idea of the human. So you take this Enlightenment ideal, the normative idea of the human, what human should be, rational, self-commanding, dominant, strong, independent, all of those things, and saying, maybe we don't want to be like that, or maybe that's just one way of being human. Maybe we can celebrate other ways of being human, emphasize other traits, and make them positive, valorize them in their own right. So reject the vision of the human as a normative ideal. And I think in that sense you get sort of fairly strong break from first wave feminism. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. By the way, how long should I go on for?
Just keep going, mate.
In 7 important strands of second wave feminism, conscious ways of feminism, one, the aim, well, radical feminism is probably the best known standard of feminism. Whether it's a second wave, I don't know, I think it probably is. And what's key to them is they sought a unifying principle, something which all women shared, because the aim, I think, of a lot of second wave feminism was a universal women's movement, all women to unite. If you're going to unite all women, you need some principle which unites them. So women qua women, some essence, some end, something, some property which all women share. And you say, look, we're all the same. We should, unite and become one because we are all one. Thus, that unifying principle becomes a foundation justification for feminist politics. The creation of women's universal movement. That's a banner around which all women say, yes, I identify with that, I care about that, I'll be part of that. And there are various attempts to sort of identify what that was. Experience of repression, or the body that women will have, sort of, there's some femininity, some essence to the body, or mothering, women share that, or certain cognitive moral capacities, something which makes all women women, a singular thing. So imagine a category of entities, all those categories in that, all the entities in that category of women, there's some property which they all share, which makes them belong to that category in the sort of, put some metaphysics in there for the philosophers. Yes, effectively some sort of female essence or shared sisterhood, something like that. I think this was sort of a major concern of lots of second wave feminists. And just to give an example of that, an early example of the second wave, the Red Stockings liberation movement, women uniting to that liberation from male supremacy. That's there. So the agents of oppression of men, finally we identify with all women. There is a collective unity being women that makes us women, singular. Patriarchy is the oldest, most basic form of domination, thus all other forms of exploitation and oppression are extensions of male supremacy. It is the fundamental source of conflict, it's a fundamental problem in society. If we can solve that, we will solve many of the problems of society. So the sort of reductive account of politics, reductive account of oppression, comes down to patriarchy. And on the flip side, all men receive economic, sexual and psychological benefits of male supremacy. It is all women against all men. Straight down the line. I challenge that idea. Lots of people challenge that idea. No, right. All men have oppressed women. Well, have they? Maybe. Men are oppressed by patriarchy too. Key point. As Butler makes unwell. So, attempt to connect all women against all men, soon challenges homogenizing. What do I mean by that? Well, it tended, I say it's sort of reductive and it's homogenizing in that it treats all women as the same. So it subsumes difference and excludes new exclusionary norm. So you had the shift from human to man, straight women, but then decided to say, well, what is this concept of women that we're talking about? What is the image of women that we're portraying and saying, well, look, we're all the same, us women. What image do we have in mind? Tended to end up as something white, middle class, educated, heterosexual, something like that. So the normative ideal, the human, just was split in two, but that concept of man and woman was seen as just as problematic, just as exclusionary as a general concept of human. So it tacitly invoked a norm, this norm, which it assumed all women was, thus ignoring the sort of experiences, forms of oppression that others, maybe black women or uneducated women face. There's a famous feminist who says the solution for women is just sort of get into work, which ignores the fact that loads of women have been working for ages, as domestic service and those sorts of things, but obviously as an educated middle class woman she didn't work, so couldn't comprehend the experience and realities of other types of women. This was the claim. Also, tendency in lots of sort of second-wave feminists to emphasise some sort of authentic or true self, some sort of idea of authenticity. This is what I really am. Beneath the veneer of that patriarchy is imposed on me, this is my true gendered self, my true womanness. Do you find it crop up in quite a lot of texts, tacitly at least? This was seen as hugely problematic because, well, what is a true self? Where is it? How do we know it's a true self? A general scepticism towards notions of authenticity and idea of true self, true identity, sort of exploded in the 60s and 70s, post-structuralism and that sort of thing. You can go into that. So you get the proliferation of different forms of feminism, black feminism, lesbian feminism, Marxist feminism, that emphasise the connections of patriarchy with other axes of identity. So the black feminists said, well, look, yeah, okay, that's fine. You know, we are oppressed as women, but we're also oppressed as being black, and you white women don't understand that. So it sort of cleaved up feminism into a plurality of feminisms. Exciting, interesting, good. But obviously that's going to challenge this idea of a universal concept of women, or a universal women's movement, because what is it that you're rallying around? Well, it's not clear anymore, because you have all these multiple issues to try and contend or deal with. Okay. So, yeah, feminists in the 1980s seemingly tried to respond or grapple or understand these issues, rejecting essentialist accounts of what it is to be women. There's some true gendered self or true sort of essence to women. The problem with pluralism, you have multiple different forms of feminism, how you negotiate between them, which links into difference. How can we account for difference? How can women acknowledge each other's difference and yet still have sort of general hold on to the concept of woman as a sort of singular reductive term that incorporates all women? What is it that all women share, whilst yet still acknowledging difference? This is the problem. And then, and I think this is a really interesting, exciting bit, how do you incorporate issues connected to power and discourse? Michel Foucault, if you're aware of the work of Foucault, he is fantastic. I think, yeah, right, Foucault, it's brilliant. And he's had a huge influence on feminism. The key idea being that to understand politics, to understand people, to understand identity, we have to connect it to issues of power and discourse. And I'll go into that more with Butler. So this is the sort of intellectual milieu that Butler is coming out of. They're the different forms of feminism, what they try to achieve. Okay, which brings me eventually Judith Butler. What is she trying to do? To radically reconceptualise how we understand gender, sex, and subject, by extension, social theory, political critique, etc. And what I think is key in a work, what I really take from it, is this concept of how is gender rendered intelligible? How is it that gender is a meaningful term? What do we mean by gender? How is it meaningful? How do we recognise people as gendered entities? What is it that forces us into this particular way of being gendered, and what is thus rendered unintelligible or disavowed, so that's not really allowed? How do we carve up the intelligible to the unintelligible? Which is to point to the way that norms and exclusions are played during the production of gender subjects. I'll get into this more, hopefully, in a moment. The key idea being that we are meaningful and recognisable, but in making ourselves really meaningful and recognisable, we sort of disavow other ways of being, which we say, well, that's not right, that's not proper, we don't really allow that, to enforce the norm, this is how we should all behave. In not saying this is how we all should all behave, but saying, well, you shouldn't behave like that, necessarily. You have to behave like this, that's wrong, this is right. Forcing people into certain forms of behaviour, certain modes of thought, to become intelligibly male or female. This, she thinks, is fundamentally problematic, and this is what feminism has to address. So that's what she's looking at. And connected to that, how did gender come to define us so fundamentally? Because, as Foucault says, sexuality and gender is the truth of us. It's sort of the most fundamental way we carve up the world into men and women, doom, straight, that's it, it's the essence of us. That's how we understand each other. Probably the first thing you notice about someone is their gender. Why? Why has it become such a meaningful, defining concept? Again, you might challenge that idea, but I think it's true. When you walk down the street, boom, first thing you see, maybe we're hypersexualised, but why are we hypersexualised? What is it about sexuality? How is that connected to understanding who we are, the essence of ourselves? We make sense of ourselves through our gender, through our sexuality. Why? What are the effects of that? These are the sorts of questions she's asking. So sort of fundamentally saying, what is the subject? The subject. How do we understand that? What's its place within politics? And that's the particular relevance, I think, is analysing the subject in such a way, a good way, and how that affects the way we do politics. Okay. Rejecting or challenging first and second wave feminism, rather than seeking to sort of take this idea of gender or women as fundamental, as a sort of foundation in feminist discourse, she seeks to challenge that. She seeks to displace it, to say, well, maybe we interrogate it. We don't just take it as a starting point for critique, we make it the focus of critique. We don't just settle what it is to be a woman and then the politics follow from that. The politics are themselves a critique of what it is to be a woman. To analyse that, to contest that, to hear the different voices, to negotiate between these different perceptions. We can do feminist politics without knowing necessarily what a woman is. In fact, asking that question is the base of feminist politics. Obviously, the same is said for man. What is man? So pretty much everything I think you can say about women, you can just switch for man, because they are the other side of each other. In fact, normally, we treat them as binary oppositions to either man or women. But look, if women is problematic, so is man. And there's lots of sort of masculinist philosophy, or whatever the word is, that explores that. So this is, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I'm a man, why do I care? Just ignore the WO, and all of this will be interesting for you. Good, so what we need to do is, I think, what she says, and what Foucault says, more generally, must situate the individual within networks of power and norms that construct the very notion of the intelligible individual, the subject. So in what ways are we created as recognisable, meaningful entities? That's something we can look in the mirror and say, that's me. How does that come about? What is it that allows us to sort of understand ourselves as entities, as intelligible individuals, as subjects, as agents? Assume that we're not them necessarily, how do we come to be that thing? And this is where she really, I think, borrows from Foucault, and this is where Butler's really good, is drawing attention to the ways that power and norms, normally just a way of thinking, a way of behaving, shape us, influence us, create us, to allow us to exist in the first place. She thinks we can never exist independently of power and norms, and that's a strong claim, and that leads to a specific kind of politics, and a very good, I think, kind of politics, but a very different kind of politics to what was traditionally done. We've done history of political thought, it's contra, Hobbes, Locke, all of those guys. Totally different, they don't even think about problems. So gender is always an inescapably mediated through or constructed by discourse. Challenge the theorists is how to respond to this. How do we understand and challenge the discourses about gender? So who defines gender? What are the effects of defining gender? Who has control of creating these discourses? Or how do we alter these discourses? What examples of that? Things like the medical community that are researching in gender, saying, well, this is what gender is. We've done this test, we've discovered some things. How does that function to, create us as gendered individuals? I don't know if I explained it very well, but I'll come back to it if you don't understand it. Good. Okay, the key concepts in Butler, really, really interesting, good idea she has, things she's famous for, and also the most misunderstood concept in Butler, as is often the way of philosophers, formativity. This is a big thing. Everyone loves it. It's very good. Mostly associated with the book Gender Trouble, which she wrote in 1990. Fantastic book. If you never read it, read it. Change your life. Yes. She wrote one before that, which she sort of said, which I haven't written that, it's a bit rubbish. So start with Gender Trouble. So the idea of performativity, or the performativity of gender. What is it? Well, Butler denies that gender is natural and constitutive of a person's essence. There is no essence to people. Gender is not something we're born with. It's something we become. It's a social product, or a product of society, a product of discourse. It is non-natural. There's nothing about gender that is natural. If we investigate in nature, we won't find gender. We'll find behaviours, but we won't find its property, gender. If we cut people up, we won't find some gendered essence to them. So this idea that I am a woman, I am X, well, that X, woman is not a natural property of people. Doesn't belong to whatever we are, intrinsically. So, a couple of quotes. Gender is in no way a stable identity or locus of agency from which various acts proceed. Rather, it is an identity tendency constituted in time. An identity introduced through a stylized repetition of acts. What does that mean? Well, basically, gender is a performance, in a loose sense. Gender is constituted by all the little actions you do, all the norms that you act out. So, gender isn't something you are, it's something you do, in a slogan. I don't walk in a certain way because I'm a man because I walk in a certain way. that's effectively the idea, turning it on the head. All the things we do, we tend to say, oh, why do that? Oh, God, it's because I'm a man, because I'm a woman. No. Those acts, which you're sort of coerced into doing, are collected together, and that is what gives us gender, or makes us a gendered entity. Right from the very beginning of how you're dressed or how you're expected to speak, all of these things, we collate together and create a coherent sense of gender identity. Not only that, but we're enforced into that, and that's where the norms come in. There are norms of gender. The whole world is completely infiltrated with the norms of gender. So which toilet you go into, what clothes you wear, to how you interact with one another, do you shake hands, everything. And so I think that is gender discourse. The world is infiltrated with it. We are just located within this sort of network of norms, and through being implicated in that, we become gendered individuals. We become meaningful entities, selves, gendered selves. Can't separate gender from self. So, she says, therefore, gender is not exactly what one is, nor is it precisely what one has. Gender is the apparatus by which the production and normalisation of masculine and feminine take place. So, gender, discursive production. It is a network of discourses which collectively produce the notion of us as gender entities. Hopefully that sort of makes sense. It's a key idea, and it shifts away from lots of early feminist thinking of, we just discover what we are as women. We kind of look at our experiences, or we look at our bodies or something like that, and we'll get some pure knowledge, some pure epistemological insight into what gender is that maybe men don't have because we're women and we can understand ourselves. So there's no, it's not an introspective process to understand gender. It's looking at the world is configured to produce gender. Social spaces, discourses, literature, science, medicine combine. Which case, if we want to analyse gender, we analyse those discourses. Just sort of look at ourselves and analyse ourselves, the world out there. Yes. Key to this is it's not free performance, and I think this is where people often go wrong with Butler traditionally. They think, performatively gender is just performance. I can just change my performance. And you see, says no. Gender is always a scene of constraint, hence normalisation. It coerces us into a particular narrow way of being, which we can't really deviate from, or we can in small ways. How much agency we have in altering that performance, in sort of changing our gender, that's a really interesting discussion and debate, and that's where there's lots of controversy. She seems to imply that we don't have much, others think we have more. But how we change gender norms, this is sort of one of the main issues with and in Butler. Is it sexual? Probably not. Yes, maybe we could talk more about that. But the idea of gender formativity isn't that I form a gender. It is that I, as some entity, and gender are inextricably linked. Identity and gender identity is a fictive effect of power and knowledge. So, formativity goes all the way down. And it's perhaps the most controversial bit of Butler, and hopefully they'll explain it well. Says the substantive I only appears through a signifying practice that seeks to conceal its own workings and to naturalise its effects. So the I, this sort of locus of agency or subjectivity or meanness, doesn't take on a gender, doesn't take on an identity, it's produced through identity, through the construction of identities, through the construction of subjects. So maybe if you think back to, I don't know, people like, certainly Hobbes, Locke, Hume, Descartes, they had a notion of an I, some sort of inner mental life, mental realm, some agency, something like that, which imposed itself onto the world. This was me here, putting myself out there. She says, no, there is no I. What is it? Where is it? That only appears through the action. It's through looking at actions and wondering, well, who did that? Oh, it must have been an I that did that. She said, no, it's not there. You only construct it out of those actions you do. And she borrows heavily from Nietzsche here in the genealogy of morality. Or is it Beyond Good and Evil? No, genealogy of morality, I think. Says there's no being behind the doing, affecting or becoming. The doer is simply fabricated into the being, into the doing. The doing is everything. There is no doer behind the deed. So if you have an action, it's not there's a will or an I that pre-exists that action from which that action follows. In doing the action, you construct the I, the notion of yourself as an agent. So there's no agency or will or I here imposing itself onto the world and explaining action. You look at the action and then you trace back and we construct out of that, we fabricate an I or sort of subject behind it. And this, I think, is where people think, that's too much, that's just too out there. We need to hold on to some notion of agency, some agent, some I. That's just too far. Some people say, I think no. But it gets tricky because, politics, physical theory is premised on the idea of agents that have a will that they want to satisfy. I mean, think back to Hobbes, the state of nature. You have a set of eyes of agents wandering around, doing what they want. The problem with society is it limits that freedom of the eye. It takes away our agency. In Butler, that doesn't work. There is no agent until there is society. So it's not that we're losing our freedom in being social beings, we're creating ourselves. We don't really exist outside of social interactions. Subjective, thoroughly subjective. We can't make sense of ourselves outside of some discourse or network of norms, that sort of thing. So if politics is about understanding who we are, what the subject is, what agency is, this is her account of that. Hopefully that makes sense. It doesn't come much. That's a long quote. Will I read it out? Maybe just read it. Refuse to search for the origins of gender. There is no inner truth of female desire, no genuine, authentic sexual identity that repression is kept from view. Feminism is not about unleashing or uncovering or celebrating the feminine, because there is no feminine to be uncovered. It's constructive. It's about analysing existing conceptions of femininity and working out maybe ways we might want to change it or don't want to change it. But it's not liberating ourselves, it's not a modern liberation, because there's no subject to be liberated. And this was Foucault's main point. When we look at emancipatory liberatory politics, they imply something which is currently repressed to be liberated. It says, what is that thing to be liberated? There is no I, there is no subject, no pure realm of meanness that's being oppressed, that needs to be realised. That's just to essentialise and internalise the self, but there is no self outside formativity. So we can't just sort of trace back to some original identity that's been problematized as an effective institution to practice discourses. Multiple construction. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, that's then the idea of formativity. Other key issues that I think are good with the instability of identity. Because identity is just the sort of playing out of norms, we never do that perfectly. There's always slippage. There's always an imperfect replication of, say, the stereotype or the image or the norm of man or woman. No one plays the role perfectly. This is exciting and interesting because you did Derrida last week, and this is kind of what she takes from Derrida. The impossibility, iterative impossibility. Norms can never be perfectly replicated. There is always inherent instability in all attempts to enact norms. That's deconstruction. It's just inherent instability. Because of that, identities are sort of tenuous and they're problematic and they crumble a bit, and we try and pave over the cracks. And the exciting bit is to sort of give it a bit of a poke where it looks like it's crumbling a little bit. Where are those slippages? Example, someone's born intersexed. Suddenly a whole notion of this binary exhaustive thing, either man or woman, is thrown into not disarray, it is challenged, it's problematized. Normally they quickly grab the baby and lop off or do something with it to quickly get it into a single category. But there's interesting development of intersex movements to say, well, why did you do that? Why intervene? So challenges to the existing ideas of gender will always arise because we can never perfectly be men and women. We can never become a man or pure woman. We can approximate and aim for. But we'll always slip away, and thus there's always going to be problems. And we can investigate that as feminists and as researchers. We can also subvert it through parody. And again, this is sort of controversial, much interpreted bit of Butler's work. The idea being that parodying gender, so something like drag, draws attentions to the norms which construct gender. So by pretending to be, as a man pretending to be a woman, you're saying, well, look, these are norms of womanness, and anyone can act them out. And it highlights the way that we are, that identity is socially constructed. And because, again, yeah, other issues, undoing subject, already sort of talked about that. Another key issue, the body. The body for Butler is never an immediate thing, again, because everything is mediated through discourse. The body is mediated through discourse. How we experience ourselves as embodied beings, how we understand the body, how we value the body, these are all products of social discourses. Again, she takes this from Foucault, the idea of biopolitics. So traditionally, a lot of feminists sort of seen thought we had unmediated access to the body. We can understand that our body, we have, in a Wittgensteinian sense, we have a sort of pure unmediated access to our inner thoughts, our inner realm. She says no. Wittgenstein says no relation. She says no. The body is always understood through discourse, thus there is no ultimate true sense of what the body is or way of experiencing the body. Earlier feminists sort of honed in on the body, and they still do actually, as maybe a site free from power, free from discourse, something like that that they could access, talk about. Female essence, somehow bodily, or embodied being. She said no, it's all rubbish. Again, so the idea of experience linking to that, there is no pure realm of experience. There's no true account of experience. One person maybe. There's no privileged epistemological viewpoint. No God's eye view. I mean, she shares this with lots of thinkers. And finally, she's radically anti-foundationist. So there is no fundamental foundations. Again, there's lots of anti-foundationists in philosophers, so I won't go on too much. But she says we don't need a foundation, or there is no firm foundation for feminism. We don't need to find that sort of solid ground from which we do our politics. In fact, the very instability or contingency of foundations, that's the foundation of politics, paradoxically. That we can take this as our starting point and run. We don't need to sort of say, this is what a woman is, and feminist politics follows from that. So you start with critique. She's got a lovely paper called Contingent Foundations. Sets all of that out. Right. This is, I'm not even going to talk too much about it, because this is how I use Butler in Rethinking Recognition, my PhD, is looking at the way we render it intelligible. Lots of theorists think that recognition is a really good thing. There's a problem is get greater recognition. Recognise one another, respect one another. Respect me as X, recognise me as this. That's a loose characterisation of recognition identity politics. I think Butler is a very useful way of analysing and critiquing that way of thinking. Why I won't go into now, because I want to wind down. I've been rambling for a while, but it's interesting. So always said rejection liberation this is also exciting for politics. Politics shouldn't be a liberationist or emancipatory politics. It's continual critique and renegotiation of norms. Because we're always embedded within networks of power and discourse, there is no end point where we can say, right, we've won, we've finished. There is no end point to politics. There is no space over there where we say, that's the ideal, we just need to get closer to it. It's constantly renegotiating itself, constantly critiquing itself, but we're never going to get to a point of, the problem is solved. We constantly sort of, problems are displaced or rethought or reconstructed, but we're not looking for a sort of Marxist utopian or a Rawlsian contract where everything's fine. That just doesn't make sense because it ignores the inescapability of power and norms, which are inherently coercive and exclusionary. So there will always be coercion, there will always be exclusion, but we can be sensitive to that and respond to that and try and root it out and rethink it. And that's what politics is about. Rather than saying, I don't know, some nice liberal model where we just let everyone get on with it in some libertarian utopia or something like that. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about that. Yes. Finally, well again, if you want to go into sort of some criticisms, these are some of the issues that people have thrown at Butler. Particularly, they don't like the loss of agency or the I, the idea of the death of the subject. Ironically, a lot of feminists said, look, it's just at the moment when feminists or women finally start to find some agency, some subjectivity, some sense of, some voice, Butler and other feminists and post-structuralists come along and say there is no subject, there is no I, there is no you. So it's almost that she's almost accused of being sort of a new guise of patriarchy, which is taking away what women have fought to gain. So some people don't like that aspect. Again, you did Derrida last week. One of the big criticisms of Derrida and Foucault is that they dissolve the body in just a passive effective discourse. It becomes pure textuality. As Derrida said, the world is a text. I don't know if he actually said that, but everyone says he said that, so he says that. He probably didn't say that. The accusation is that because the body is just an effect of power, it ignores the reality. This is a body here, it's material, it's not a text, it's not a discourse. It's real, look, I can touch it and do stuff with it. I don't think that's good criticism. I don't think she ignores the body. She's amazingly aware of the way the body works. But the point being, there is no true or pure account of that body or way of experiencing the body. That's a very different thing to me. Say the body is, there is no true way of signifying the body. It's not dissolve the body. It just shifts how we understand it. So I don't think that prison works. People still accuse her of it. Yeah. This bit I don't like is, right, it's too psychoanalytic. If any of you are psychoanalysts, then sorry, I don't like it. But I can go into why if you want, but I don't find it helpful. Particularly it's got this very, I think, slightly dubious notion of desire, which he takes from Hegel, desire for recognition. But it's too, I won't go into it.
Who has that, sorry?
Butler has, from Hegel, she
thinks
we have this sort of, at times, particularly in her early work, we almost have this like, desire becomes transcendental. It's not, it seems she posits it's non-discursive. She talks about desire as some sort of immanent principle of the psyche, but that's to imply that it's always and everywhere functioning, and that makes it somehow universal.
Might be quite Nietzschean, but I might bring that up in questions. Because you said it.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Issues of normativity, by which I mean, this is all great, you have this lovely critique, Butler, but we have to choose how we want to change society and in what direction we want to change it, or what direction do we take. You have this lovely way of deconstructing gender and rethinking gender, but how we want to change the world, what is a better world, what is the most desirable? So where is the normative foundation and direction for her work? Because it seems we do want to say, okay, there's problems here, so that possible world over there is better than this one. But how do we determine that? If we have two possible futures, on her account, how do we settle which the better future is? Political theories like the idea of there being normative foundations, saying this is better than that. Where in Butler is that? If people have thoughts on that, I'd like to hear them, because I think it's an interesting open question how we settle that in her work. So what is an issue for post-structuralists generally, I think, are very good at saying, this is bad, power, discourse, problematic, but okay, what do we do about that? Where do we go? How do we get a better society? Because we want to have this notion of a better society, but what grounds the idea of better? That's an interesting question. And some people don't like this. You might say, this is all well and good, but I genuinely feel, I don't know, like this or like that. And you're telling me this is just some product of an anonymous discourse, or that my sense of I is somehow a fictive effect of power and knowledge. No, I experience it, I feel it. I don't care what you say, this is real to me. In which case, you just bite the bullet and say, tough, you're wrong. It is a fiction, it is an effect of discourse. What you think of is this true self isn't a true self, there is no true self. I think in those cases, we'll bite the bullet and say, yeah, there you go. I'm up for that. So, yeah. This I find really interesting. Part of my research is looking into transsexuality. And what's interesting about transsexuality is I make very strong claims that I am truly a woman, I'm in a man's body. This is my essence, I am a woman, I feel it. On a Butlerian camp, you have to say, well, you might feel it, but it's not true to you, it's not somehow non-discursive, and you might be reluctant to go that far, but I think you just bite the bullet and say, so much work for notions of authenticity and that sort of thing. Good. That's the impact of the work. You can read it. Basically, what I covered. What I want to conclude with this: gender impacts all allies and thus relevant to all people, because we are all implicated within gender discourses, networks of power which construct gender. We're all subject to it. We all suffer if we deviate from it, guys as much as girls. In some ways, girls less than guys. I can't wear a skirt very easily, even wear trousers.
Do you want a pipe band?
Joan pipe band. Yeah, I could wear a kilt. Yes. But yes, gender is man and woman, and I find it bizarre when men aren't interested in feminism, because evidently feminism affects men as much as it affects women. I think, because man and women, it's co-implicated. We can't talk about women without having man, because they're defined in opposition. So if we're critiquing one, we're critiquing the other. Yes, if gender is coercive, it's just as coercive for men as it is for women. It may be that our current gender system benefits men more than women, but it's still problematic, because gender is inherently problematic, because it's performative. Yes. Good, that's all I have to waffle about. Very nice.